Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm Zias Caravallo from ZK Research, and I am joined today by Garth Landers, who is Director of Product Marketing at Theta Lake. Garth, why don't you say hello to everybody? Just do a quick intro on yourself and tell us what Theta Lake does.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Zias. So again, Director of Product Marketing at Theta Lake. We are responsible for providing compliance and security for unified and modern collaboration platforms today. So everything you think of in your organization that really, took off and accelerated during the pandemic and is really part of the mainstream workplace today, everything ranging from Zoom to Microsoft Teams to Cisco WebEx, RingCentral, Asana, and as we'll talk today about whiteboards, we're there to help regulated organizations provide a compliance solution so that they can unlock the features, accelerate the adoption of these technologies in their organization, and know they're using them safe and compliantly. We're founded in 2017 with the intention of supporting all of these platforms and not only partner and have over 100 integrations across voice, video, text, communications, but we're also partners and invested by Zoom, Cisco, RingCentral, and others, Salesforce and Slack as well.
Yeah, that just, I guess, goes to show how important this is. You mentioned Mural, which we'll talk about in a bit, but I understand at Enterprise Connect, you actually won Best of Show for that. And you guys seem to win a lot of awards, which I think underscores the importance of security and compliance. Now, you touched on the pandemic, and I just wanted to level set a little bit here. What are you seeing from your customer base? There's a lot of chatter. Are people going back in the office? Are they not? Hybrid work is a big focus of conversation at Enterprise Connect. What are you seeing from your customer base, who tends to be, very a lot of the regulated industries, which frankly I thought would never work remotely historically, right?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, financial services is a big foundation for us. And you can see, a lot of those large investment banks and global banking institutions returning to office in many cases, and still for many roles supporting entirely remote work. So it really is a hybrid environment. That said, I think what we're seeing is that, the important thing is that the adoption of these tools took place, accelerated. It was happening before the pandemic, but really accelerated during the pandemic. And they've been cemented, right? They've been laid as a foundation. We have a generation of knowledge workers and users that are far more adept and familiar with using these technologies than email, for example, right? We've done some surveys that show, chat and video communications, virtual meetings have surpassed email usage. So that trend is well established. And, to the question of where it's taking place, I don't think that's as important so much as, how it's taking place. The idea that virtual meetings are a part of the foundation of the workplace, and that chat, mobile communications, SMS are, sanctioned and endorsed by companies. So, the other thing about return to office and, life post-pandemic now in 2023 is that we have freedom and people are on the go, they're on the move, they're traveling. So for example, you were at Enterprise Connect, and we've communicated many times. You're often on the go in an airport, in a coffee shop, however it is, and we're using all of those tools. So that applies to, the fabric of work as well.
Yeah, and I'm assuming as people move from the office out to their home or wherever they were working from, vacation or wherever, compliance got harder, correct? Like, could you just walk through some of the challenges that companies may face?
Yeah, so looking at this through the backwards, historical lens, everyone really rushed out, regulated organizations as well. Let's get empowered, let's collaborate, let's get people up and moving and productive when the pandemic occurred. And compliance and security, while not an afterthought, was secondary, right? And so now time has passed and regulators have certainly noticed, right? We saw in the last year over $2 billion worth of fines, US dollars, against 5 very large investment banks. And, the warnings of many of potentially more to come on a global basis. So regulators have taken note. From a compliance, challenges standpoint, organizations historically have built infrastructure, to support the monitoring and capture of communications like email and chat, to certainly as well, as that's been around for some time. But these virtual meeting platforms are a newer challenge for those organizations. And so what to capture, what are people using? As well as anyone, large organizations, for example, may have between 3 and 6 different platforms. They're taking best of breeds approaches. So from a compliance standpoint, those internal compliance teams have to really get an understanding of the landscape. What are they doing? What are we sanctioning? What are users potentially doing that's unsanctioned, right? With those fines, a lot of it was WhatsApp usage, and we'll talk about that, for example. But so it's really a quantity and acceleration and volume of communications that's really overwhelmed some organizations, and really not knowing what they have and what's taking place, both from a sponsored and sanctioned standpoint to a shadow IT perspective.
Yeah, and you're, from what I understand, I've seen your tool in action. It's very sophisticated. It can actually look for watermarks on documents. It can recognize images on the screen, and so it's not just text, right? It's really any type of communication. And you mentioned that companies use between 3 and 6 collaboration tools. I think also you've probably seen this in your customer base. It seemed like last year at this time we were all talking about how companies might consolidate down to one. And that's just not happened. In fact, I saw a study by NetScout a little, maybe a year or so ago, that said companies are actually looking to increase the number of collaboration tools that we have. So I think multi-vendor is certainly the way forward, and that just adds the complexity, correct?
Yeah, that's. I mean, you and I have seen all of these trends before. Every time there's a new, advent of technology, there's a desire to streamline it. And the reality is, lots of these platforms, they do lots of different things. There's different modalities, different use cases, and organizations, think about that as an ideal, but it remains that an ideal. And so I think probably the realistic trend is, maybe during the pandemic when this first happened, they had a half dozen or they had 8, and now they're streamlining to 3 or 4 and taking a best of breed approach. So consolidation has happened, but it's consolidation from a very large, starting point.
Yeah, and the cost of non-compliance, actually, you talked about some issues, and I've always said that as an organization, the security team can't be the department of no, right? Because users will find a way. And you mentioned WhatsApp, and I imagine they were using WhatsApp because they weren't allowed to do what they wanted to do with one of the corporate tools. And I've always likened consumer behavior to be a little bit like, if you remember the old Jurassic Park movie where, life finds a way, right? Users find a way.
Right.
They're going to communicate now. But so, sometimes companies look at the cost of compliance as being overwhelming, but some data from a report that you and I worked on together, which I'll make sure the link's included below, but the average cost of compliance, here's some data points, was about $5.5 million per organization, but the cost of non-compliance was about 10 million more than that. It was at 14.8 million. The average cost of non-compliance, in fact, has increased 45% in 10 years, and the remediation costs for every event is about 4 million in revenue. So this is an expensive. If you get compliance wrong, it can be extremely expensive, right?
Yeah, the cost, and that's a very important lens to look through, right? I think when our customers, our prospects, the folks that we talk to in the industry, think about this. They look through that lens and they see those worst case scenarios. What's going to what could it look like on the other end of those fines and sanctions and judgments? And along with that comes a lot of bad PR and loss of brand and reputation and, bad news cycles and all of those things. And that's important. I think the other thing that they're seeing, and to your point, which was, being the department of no, users are going to find a way, water finds a way, people are going to adopt those consumer-based behaviors and technologies they use. That's another cost. And that cost is, there's a few things going on there. One is most of our customers and prospects have invested in multiple platforms, and they've made the decision to adopt these, and then they're saying no and they're restricting functionality. So they're not getting the full economic value of that investment. In many cases, they're paying for functionality, whether it's chat or in-meeting chat or polling or whiteboards, and they're not reaping the rewards, right? So that's a lost productivity cost that goes on. And then there's other costs as well, from a productivity standpoint. Compliance personnel, they need to review this. And if it's not easy to do, if they're losing the context of those communications, if a chat is truncated into a series of emails, which is what legacy approaches do, or if they're not able to capture emojis and emoticons and reactions and likes and GIFs and memes, and understand the context, for compliance folks, that becomes very challenging, burdensome, and they get bogged down. They lose the ability to detect that risk, and they spend more time reviewing content than they would than not using us. So there's a lot of different cost factors to look at from a compliance and productivity standpoint, and really unlocking the value of those unified communication investments.
Yeah, I think the other aspect too is if you do try and review it manually, you really can't do all of them, right?
Now,
You're doing spot checks where your system can actually see every conversation in every system. So I think that's just 100% coverage is the other benefit. So now I think it's in some ways it's obvious the benefit you provide the company and even the compliance department. But what about the user? Does your software get in the way and make the user's life more difficult?
no, it's completely transparent to users. There's no, it's happening from a infrastructure standpoint. We seamlessly integrate with the communications platform or collaboration platform. We call it smart capture that data in its native format, preserving the context and fidelity, as I was alluding to. And that travels downstream to the compliance teams and archives. It doesn't have to be our archive. It doesn't have to be our compliance system. We can route that content downstream. And for the end user, for a user, there's no impact on their work. They don't have to log into something. They don't have to check a box. Completely transparent. For the administrator of Theta Lake, this is something that is deployed in hours, at most days, although I haven't seen multiple day implementations, and not weeks or months or quarters. We do use technologies downstream when customers decide to utilize risk-based detections that utilize artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing. All of that is, even from a marketer standpoint, which I am, is out of the box, right? So we have 85 plus detections that come out of the box, and you don't have to really do anything to configure and make those go. So there's not a lot from a nothing from an end user standpoint. From an administrator standpoint, pretty easy, doesn't require the work of an FTE or anything like that. And obviously, as a SaaS provider, as a cloud vendor, we're not services based.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so this allows companies to meet the requirements without actually getting in the way of the end user, which is kind of a rare.
They're trust systems, right?
Yeah.
They ask the end user to buy into utilizing a WhatsApp, and require them, maybe to log in or whatever. But we're not doing that.
That's great. Now, I know you had talked about the Mural partnership, which is what you won the award for. Can you talk about that partnership and what it brings to the user and how it works?
Yeah, I do have to make just one correction. We did win the award. It was for best overall. So
best overall, correct?
I couldn't say that. Didn't want that to get away, because we were really proud to win a best overall award at Enterprise Connect, which, as you know, is one of the premier events for unified communications. And as a company that's primarily compliance or security based, we're used to winning awards like that are compliance and security based. So we were really proud to win a best overall award. At the conference, we did announce.
Actually, just before you go on that, I've been part of that event for years, and I've seen these awards go on for 20. And I believe you're the first actually security company to win that, because it does. Usually, it goes to the shiny new room system or whiteboard or something like that. So I do think that that is a notable achievement for you.
Thank you. We were really honored and flattered to win it. And probably maybe somewhat surprised as well.
Yeah.
So the news that we announced was on day one our integration and support for Mural, and we thought this was really important to announce at the conference. As you know, whiteboards are one of the fastest growing, dynamic segments of unified communications today. They allow you to, create dynamic visual content and collaborate and ideate and, do this in a persistent manner, build content over time that grows and accumulates and changes. And so from a regulated industry standpoint, this is one of those technology groups that, is befuddled. Regulators, see this as a potential challenge, particularly as there hadn't been anyone to date that supported dynamic visual, communications and whiteboards like Theta Lake. So we announced that with our friends at Mural, and they're great. Obviously, they've had a lot of news of their own and have seen a lot of growth and adoption of their tools. And the value proposition for both of us is similar, from a partnership standpoint, and that is, if you're in a regulated organization, you might be hesitant to really adopt and fully embrace what Mural can do. But knowing that they have a partner, integration, seamless, not complex, that works with Theta Lake, and that they can do that work, and Theta Lake is there in the background, it allows those groups like financial services and healthcare and public sector and others to fully embrace it. Whereas before they were, they didn't know what the regulators were going to say in the future, and they didn't have a solution to really safeguard and monitor and protect that data. So in some cases, they just weren't doing it. So we're hoping and looking forward to a lot more renewed interest in the regulated markets around whiteboards and dynamic visual content.
Yeah, and I think that'll continue to be an area that companies invest in. One of the interesting data points that came from Cisco WebEx1 last year was that 95% of meetings would contain at least one virtual participant. So, whiteboarding is a very standard tool, and it's interesting because it's not like digital whiteboards are new, but I've always thought they were a bit of a solution looking for a problem. But the problem came in the form of COVID, I guess, which gave it a reason to exist. And so, the technology, frankly, come a long way. It's not those. I think a lot of people that use the older systems didn't really like the experience, but they're very good today.
Yeah, it's like everything else. I mean, there's just so many new ways of working, and they're just more intuitive than they've ever been, right? They're not programmatic, they're not complex, they're entirely GUI and user based. So it's an amazing thing. And there's just so many examples of that taking place. It's users have tremendous choices now.
Yeah. Now the other partnership I wanted to dive a little deep in is the one with RingCentral. Again, I wrote a paper for you guys on that, and I'll make sure the link's included below. RingCentral, though, the market leader in UCaaS, has been for a long time. They also provide some CCaaS services. What are you doing with Ring?
Well, RingCentral is a partner and investor in Theta Lake, and we've been supporting and working with them for the entirety of our founding as a company. So in short, we really support all the use cases across RingCentral. So everything from RingCentral SMS, which we talked about as a safe, alternative, sanctioned approach towards mobile messaging that you can use, to their virtual meetings, to voice, and more. Most recently, we this month we actually announced support for Contact Center. And so with Contact Center, you can get screen recordings and video recordings, and preserve them, and do risk detection and potential data loss protection and e-discovery if you need against that content. Contact Center is another emerging growth outlet for not only RingCentral, but I think unified communications in general. It's becoming more, those contact center applications are becoming more of a decision matrix as organizations start to, in some cases, if they're going from an on-prem legacy platform to the cloud, that contact center has a lot of CIO implications and interest. And so that's an important avenue and outlet for us. So that was the most recent use case that we're supporting with RingCentral. And we work with RingCentral across, they're amazing, I think, because they really support the full spectrum of organization types, everyone from SMB to mid-market to large organizations as well, that's not easy to do, right? From a sales management, Salesforce standpoint, that's challenging, but they do it really well.
Yeah, I think all the partnerships they have in place too, with the Avise and Mitels and things, helped them move up market as well. And the contact center piece is interesting too, because without a doubt, contact center agents are staying at home. And I think a lot of people thought you might see those reemerge back to the office. But I think one of the things that contact center managers have found out is they can attract better people in better areas. They've got flexible hours. But the one thing that comes up every time I talk to contact center managers, they need better tools to manage because they cannot walk around and listen to calls. And so you provide a lot of those tools.
Yes, absolutely. And those contact center, workers for RingCentral and other platforms, they're using not only the stuff in contact center, but they might be using other elements of the platform as well. So, everything from SMS and outbound messages and, mobile chat and in-meeting chat. So they need that full spectrum of support from a, downstream. The compliance teams need to really be able to capture all of those in a unified way when they're working with one platform or many platforms.
All right, Garth. Well, thank you very much for the introduction to Theta Lake and all the great work that you're doing. If you're watching this and you have a hybrid workforce, which everybody does today, Theta Lake isn't just for regulated industries. I know you have a pretty broad customer base across all verticals. And so if you want to be able to understand what your workers are doing without getting in the way, I think you guys provide an excellent solution for that. So on behalf of Garth, I'm ZS Caravallo from ZK Research, saying thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on another ZKast.